Okay, again, thank you for joining the Memorial Library of Nazareth and vicinity this evening to celebrate Banned Books Week. Banned Books Week is an annual event. It was launched in 1982 in response to what was a sudden surge in the number of challenges to various books in schools, in bookstores, and in libraries. So Banned Books Week brings together the entire book community every year. Librarians, booksellers, publishers, journalists, teachers, readers, in shared support of the freedom to seek and to express ideas, even those some consider either unorthodox or unpopular. So this year, Banned Books Week is right now, and it continues through October 3rd. And this year's theme is Censorship is a Dead End, Find Your Freedom to Read. The Memorial Library of Nazareth and vicinity is embracing this theme by highlighting banned books. If you've been to the library, you'll see a creative display in the main area, as well as events like this evening's. If you're new to the library, we're also very active all throughout the year. We have lots of upcoming events, things like story times for young children, book groups. We have a creative writing group that's getting started. We have various Halloween events. We have a website scavenger hunt contest going on. We have author talks. So lots of things you can get involved in. Tonight's event specifically is to celebrate first the freedom to read, and second, our community coming together on a virtual platform to inform, to enlighten, and to challenge each other in understanding censorship as a dead end on the path to knowledge and expression. We really want to celebrate rather than suppress dialogue. To ban a book, some have said, is to take out an author's tongue, to mask a reader's eyes, to lean with toes curled over the edge of a slippery hill with silence at the bottom. To not lock a door to a forbidden palace, but to burn the palace to the ground. But really, to ban a book is futile in an age of awareness, and we really want to celebrate that tonight. So our panelists tonight are generously donating their time, their passion, and their expertise, and I'm really excited to introduce them to all of you here tonight. The first is Alan Benn, PhD, Distinguished Professor of English at East Stroudsburg University. He's a specialist in American literature, and he's just recently retired. The second panelist is Joyce Himmerfeld, PhD, a professor of English at Moravian College. She's the award-winning author of 2 novels and 2 short story collections. The third is Kate Rakulia, an award-winning author of 3 novels. She's an online teacher for Grub Street and an employee at Bethlehem Area Public Library. Fourth, we have Colbert Root, PhD, upper school English teacher at the Agnes Irwin School. And finally, Lee Upton, PhD, Emerita Francis A. March Professor of English and Writer-in-Residence at Lafayette College. So as far as tonight's schedule goes, we're going to ask each of the panelists to speak briefly about the topic of banned books. And then we'll open the conversation to allow each of them to respond to each other's remarks. And then finally, we'll open up the discussion to anyone who is watching and joining tonight to ask any questions or to participate in this dialogue. So I think we'll just follow that same order, if that's okay with the panelists. So beginning with Dr. Ben, and then Dr. Himmerfeld, Ms. Rakulia, Dr. Root, and then Dr. Upton. If anyone has any objections, you can let me know.
Well, thank you, Jill. Nice to meet you all. Great to be here. The chance to wear a nice shirt. I haven't had such a chance in quite a while. As I explained to Jill after receiving her kind invitation, I have no scholarly expertise in the field of censorship and freedom of speech, a very complex field. In her always polite and friendly way, Jill responded, "Would you like to do it or not?" Freshly retired, I knew I'd have plenty of time, so why not? And certainly censorship is a timely topic these days. I'll start with a poem. And Jill, that's your cue to post the poem as you promised. If you have another screen available for you, the poem is called Before Raised Eyebrows, by British poet laureate Simon Armitage. Armitage would be a better pronunciation. So I'll quickly read it as if you can't read by yourself. Before the raised eyebrows and the big tut-tut, Did any of you ever actually truly try burning a book? You have to attend, poker and stoke, make flames go leaping page to page, drive oxygen into the gills till the sheath peels open, exposing its sheets to the blaze. Get the parchments wadded, involved, to surrender in turn until the effacements begin before the extractions of ink. Even then, some charred erratum or index floats off through the trees. Some ashen verse or black-edged stanza gets raked from the layers of sludge after rain. How many books did I burn? Scores. Whose books? Whose books did you burn? Reader, I burnt yours. The sly narrator seems to be advising readers in a general sense, not just readers of the poem, that banning books is very difficult to pull off, that therefore there's no good reason to proceed to censorship after initial disapproval, raised eyebrows, and tut-tut. Banning books requires us to attend, that is, exercise constant vigilance, lest the text escape. Some ashen verse or black-edged stanza will float away to unwelcome eyes. This is an appealing, real argument against censorship, especially in the internet age. Laws making particular books or information illegal seem unenforceable. Actually, though, the shifty narrator is trying to lull us away from such measures while he or she destroys books. The poem suggests that while we dither about censorship, it is already happening to both what we write and read. I agree with Armitage's warning. Texts and information today are commonly suppressed both domestically and internationally, even though the traditional bonfires of books have taken other, less explicit forms. In the Voice of America will sound like Trump. Ann Applebaum of The Atlantic describes how the Trump administration is tampering with the Voice of America and other iconic sources of information and entertainment that bring real journalism to countries where politicians compromise the press. Sometimes these organizations have done work that goes far beyond the weekly reader versions of fearless broadcasters beaming truth behind the former Iron Curtain. For example, Radio Free Asia, congressionally funded and a thorn to North Korea, Vietnam, and most of all China, created the Open Technology Fund, or OTF, which updates technology to allow blocked material to be read on cell phones. 2/3 of cell phones in the world use OTF technology, allowing texts to be shared despite government attempts to block them, an anti-censorship entity that affects how billions of people see the world. Last year, the OTF was spun off of Radio Free Asia as an independent nonprofit with the approval of the Senate and the White House Office of Management and Budget. This past June, Letty Liu, the effective director of OTF for 14 years, was fired. According to Applebaum, very few people have helped so many Chinese citizens see through their government's lies. Some other key executives at similar organizations, which comprise the United States Agency for Global Media, were also terminated. Now, a former colleague of Steve Bannon, Michael Pack, leads this agency. He was selected despite being investigated for misuse of public funds, and he had no background with the agency. Trump personally lobbied for his appointment. Pack has replaced nonpartisans on the board with 6 individuals vetted according to whether they support popular Republican positions. Applebaum states, under the president's control, U.S.-funded broadcasters could turn into a presidential propaganda machine. Here, in this instance, no books are being burned, but it seems likely that much information will be choked off. It is, in fact, de facto censorship. Trump's recent comments about patriotic education might well threaten the flow of information here at home. The New York Times reported that in a recent speech, quoting here, The president warned against a radical movement that has emerged from decades of left-wing indoctrination in our schools. Particularly, he objected to the narrative of America as a, quote, wicked and racist nation, unquote, claiming that public education has been hijacked by Marxists. A patriotic education initiative might eventually lead to banning of types of textbooks, specific ones, that focus on traditionally liberal causes. The potential for abuse in such a scenario seems high. One recalls the 2010 actions of the Texas State Board of Education, SBOE, which required so much faith-based content that it could not all be covered within a semester. There was little time for much else. Censorship in schools can happen in the form of eliminating space for other ideas and texts. Federally mandated testing of math and language can have the same effect as Texas's requirements, which in fairness have been modified. The assessment movement is not exactly book burning, but it drastically reduces literature and other arts in classrooms. Again, de facto censorship. In addition, claims of fake news and verbal attacks on journalists have become familiar rallying cries for censorship. I think our discussion tonight is particularly timely. Thank you.
I think I'm next. Thank you, Alan. That was terrifying, as so much information is now. And it speaks to, my initial thought in being asked to be part of the panel, which was sort of, well, in the age of the internet, what's censorship really? What's banning a book? But of course, it's less obvious and more sinister, as your remarks. But in getting ready to speak tonight, I tried to think about my most recent experience with thinking about banned books and the lists of banned books, that are always sort of interesting to share with students, because who can believe that To Kill a Mockingbird was banned, or any of another long list of books that just makes no sense. But what happened to me was in the fall of 2013, so going back a ways, I was teaching a class on at Moravian, where I teach on post-World War II American fiction, and I decided I would sort of anchor the course with two novels. One, the National Book Award winner from 1953, so 50 years before, and then that year's National Book Award winner, 2012. So that meant reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man and Louise Erdrich's The Round House. And so in a kind of a timely moment, in September of that year, a school board in Boone County, North Carolina, banned Invisible Man from school libraries and classrooms. It was on an 11th grade reading list for the summer, and I think that's where a lot of stories of banned books come from in our experience. It's what summer reading assignments, right? It's sort of like I have this image of parents kind of suddenly paying attention summer to what their kids are being asked to read, and then getting exercised about it, because it does seem like in recent years that's often been the impetus for these actions. So I was following it and reporting to my students about what was happening, that was, in this case, the banning was instigated by a 12-page letter from the parent of one of the 11th graders, who got that list offering options for summer reading, and Invisible Man was one of them. And this is a quote from her letter. She says, "The narrator writes in the first person, emphasizing his individual experiences and his feelings about the events portrayed in his life. This novel is not so innocent. Instead, this book is filthier, too much for teenagers. You must respect all religions and point of views when it comes to the parents and what they feel is age appropriate for their young children to read without their knowledge. This book is freely in your library for them to read. And as a result of getting this letter, the school board voted 5-2 to ban the book from libraries within the school system. Each member of the board was given a copy of the novel to read. And at the beginning of the meeting, the chair of the board inquired if everyone had read it. And this is from a Christian Science Monitor article that came out shortly after all this was happening in September of 2013. So the McDonald, the chair of the board, said it was a hard read. And then, according to the local newspaper, another school board member, Gary Mason, said, I didn't find any literary value, and said he also considered the language inappropriate. I mean, I think you're meant to glean from this information that no one read it. But what was objected to in the book, there are scenes of rape. There's a reference to incest. And I think, there was an unspoken, but I assumed probably an objection also to cross-racial sexual relationships in the book. But all of the this woman's energy seemed to be focused on sex. And that's often the case, right? That parents somehow think that even in 2013, that their children don't have access to any information about sexual activity anywhere and shouldn't see it in a book. The Kids' Right to Read project of the National Coalition Against Censorship got involved rapidly, wrote a really, really fantastic letter that I do actually recommend reading. It's available online, in which they laid out so many valuable arguments for the value of the book and the way it's recommended and included in a lot of AP testing situations. They were speaking to the realities of educational processes that their kids would be involved with, including assessment. And here's just one paragraph or two or a few sentences actually from that letter. Without questioning the sincerity of those who object to the book, their views are not shared by all, and they have no right to impose those views on others. There is no legitimate basis to remove or restrict this book. The book unquestionably has literary and educational value. Its removal is sought solely because some parents are offended by its content. While one may sympathize with the parents' concerns, the school has a duty to base its decisions on sound educational grounds and constitutional considerations. The students deserve no less. Please restore Invisible Man to library shelves and classrooms. And in fact, they did. This is the value of the age of the internet, right? The word spread very quickly. They were kind of exposed and really embarrassed in the national media. People rallied to provide free copies of Invisible Man to all the county high school students. They would, so copies of the book were being sent far and abroad and really saturating this county in North Carolina. And on September 25th, so maybe 2 weeks from the initial decision, the Board of Education rescinded the ban following a short special hearing. And one person on the board was quoted as saying, my son is in the military. He's fighting to defend the Constitution. I mean, the letter clearly had the intended effect. And it's kind of a moving story to my mind, because you don't often hear things working that way, right? Where people on the board heard this. And of course, we're probably also facing a lot of public shaming. And maybe that was a factor too in their decision. So I was thinking about this, and also just thinking about this sort of preoccupation with sexuality. I think a lot of banning now or efforts to ban can be connected with books that explore LGBTQ identity. There's it morphs into different things, but it often seems to come back to sexuality in some way. And I'm just so struck by the reality that so much literature, sometimes I feel like it's so great that people like Trump don't read because they don't have any idea. So much literature is so incendiary and is absolutely taking down capitalism on every page. And but because they don't read novels or poetry, I feel like that's the great thing about teaching novels and poetry in classes that I teach, in which I can pretty much avoid the word politics, but just lay out my political views very, very clearly. I mean, it's not even subtle in a lot of the things that I assign. Because there's sort of no sex, right? I mean, I'm not, and that's actually in college classes, most students are like that. But I was thinking about this in relation. I'm reading Ali Smith, the Scottish writer Ali Smith's novel Summer, which is the fourth in her series of four novels named after the seasons, published in 4 years. It's kind of an amazing project. And there's a scene in that book where there's a teacher, a high school teacher in Brighton, where the book is set, and she's verbally attacked by a parent for using foreign words. And the examples are the word rancor and Bildungsroman. And she's trying to explain these are not foreign words. These are literary. I mean, this is a literary term. She's defining it for this parent. And eventually, she gets hit in the head with a brick. Someone throws a brick at this teacher. So Smith is, in all of these novels, she's pointedly interested in pro-Brexit fervor and xenophobic responses to migrants and other timely and topical issues. And she even gets COVID-19 in this book, remarkably. I mean, it just came out this summer. Can't quite understand how this all happened. But she's very focused on what's happening in the UK. And I feel like she kind of gets taken to task for being too current. Like the critiques, mostly her books have been well reviewed, but when people quibble with them, they quibble about their being almost too timely, almost as if it's kind of unseemly to do that, to write about the current moment in fiction. But I mean, these are books that are, I think, again, kind of incendiary, honestly, and on nobody's radar, really. And I find that so interesting. I think it's true also of, you could say the same about The Roundhouse, the novel that won the National Book Award in 2012, which makes a very overt critique of the complete lack of prosecution of rapes of Native American women, and does so in a very, very direct and incisive way, and has a rape scene, but sort of doesn't cross the desk, I think, of people who are going to be bothered by that. And I'm reading a book of poetry now, a collection called American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin by Terence Hayes. Also, quite incisive, angry, critical, and extremely powerful, not on anybody's radar. And this is just interesting to me. So part of me takes a lot of pleasure in just mocking this Boone County school board member who said he didn't find any literary merit in Invisible Man, right? I mean, and so making this case that, Trump's never going to read Terence Hayes and realize that he's speaking in many cases directly to him. I take a lot of pleasure in that. But I know that there are ever-present dangers. Alan referred to them. Greater dangers than ever, possibly, under a supposedly populist but actually autocratic regime like the ones we're living under now, and not just in the US, also in the UK, in India, other parts of the world. And what I worry about is, in fact, just completely decimated funding for public education, and autocratic oversight of public education, even more than is already the case, and cuts in funding, and in some cases even attempts to undercut the funding systems altogether for public libraries, on the grounds often that, quote, people don't read books anymore. This is a grave worry. I know probably a number of people here this evening. These actions can also serve to deprive people of books, and in this instant, books become banned essentially through thoughtless and cruel neglect. Thank you.
Hi. So when I thought about what I wanted to say tonight, it's all of the de facto censorship through the ways that we access information online, or the ways that we are presented with information online without any context. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's been redacted when you encounter a lot of stuff online. And I absolutely share Joyce's concerns as someone who works at a public library, as someone whose mother was a public third grade public school teacher. That sort of censorship by proxy in terms of like denying access to these literally democratic systems, that share information with everyone. Like that's a real worry. But I was thinking what I would say tonight, and I wanted to just share sort of like an anecdote from my past, how I, as a person, came to understand what censorship was, or that books were things you could ban. And it goes back to my relationship with my mother, who was a public school teacher in the school where I went. I am a raging goody two-shoes. I always have been. I like to know what the right thing is to do, and I like to do the right thing, and I don't like to make waves and all these sort of, I'm from upstate New York, but I'm deeply Midwestern, I think, in that way. And I get a lot of that from my mother. She is retired now, but she was a third grade teacher for 30 some odd years in the exact same school district that I went to. And, when you really think of like non-controversial figures, third grade teacher kind of comes up there. Although at this point, third grade public school teacher is essentially a warrior as far as I'm concerned. But so this was my mother. She was a third grade teacher. And when I think I was in second grade, I just sort of became aware that there was a book that she was reading her students in class. And it was a special book. I knew about it. I had read it. It was a local author in Syracuse. His name was Bruce Coble. And the fact that he lived in the town that I grew up in was just magical to me. And I loved this book in particular. And, you become aware of these things in the way that you become aware of the larger world when you're 6, 7, 8. I knew that my mother, for sharing this book that I loved, that she loved, from this author she loved with her kids, and the kids loved it too, I knew that there was someone who didn't want her to share it with them. And I didn't understand why. I was a parent. I knew it was a parent. Why this parent thought my mother, who was the most like decent, nicest person, non-controversial, not trying to rock any boats person, why this parent thought my mother, or was mad at my mother for reading this book. The book was called The Monsters Ring, and it was about a little boy who's being bullied, and he finds his way to this magic shop, and he gets this ring, and the ring allows him to turn into a monster and kind of defeat his bullies. But of course, he doesn't listen to the rules. He does it too many times. He got a poem that was like, this is how you use this magic power, don't abuse it. And he abused it, and he got turned into the monster permanently. And of course, that is, don't become the evil that you fight, right? It's a pretty, democratic, do unto others sort of I think a lot of human beings agree that that's a nice moral. But because there was magic in it, this parent objected to a portrayal of witchcraft. And that I didn't even know that people could approach books like that, right? This book is dangerous. And she clearly hadn't read it because it's not what it was about. Or if she read it, she didn't understand it. It's the same kind of does not compute that I get in my mind sometimes. As a published author, I had someone email me once. They had read my book from a public library. They really enjoyed it. And she's like, I just thought you'd, get a chuckle out of this. Someone took a Sharpie and blacked out all the swearing. Hi! Wow. There's a Kurt Vonnegut quote that's and I know he's talking about literary criticism, so it's not actually censorship. I'm sure Kurt Vonnegut has quotes about censorship, but it's someone who, comes at a piece, really comes hard for a piece of writing is someone who's put on a suit of armor to attack an ice cream sundae. It just does not, it just shows a fundamental disconnect in understanding of what literature is, what information is, what access is, what democracy is, what the point of all of this is, understanding greater complexity other than, he turns into a monster, so it must be witchcraft, and that is dangerous. So anyway, I saw my mother have this situation, and I know how much my mother does not like conflict because I do not like conflict either, but my mother just did not bend. And it wasn't even a question. She wasn't it was almost like I knew it was kind of preying on her, but she never doubted the veracity of what she believed in terms of the value of this book and the value of, sharing this book with her class, like the educational value of it. And I was like, oh, that's something really worth fighting for. Like, just from a very young age, very clear to me, this is something worth fighting for. And so he was a local author. He came to school when I was in fourth grade. He visited. I got to meet him. I wrote him letters back and forth as a young person. Hugely influential to me as a young person, seeing a writer, a working writer, that, like books don't just like, books are not witchcraft. Books are written by humans, right? And that's a thing that you too can aspire to. And he actually wrote a book. I think it's out of print now. It's not one of his best titles, but it was a book about censorship, where these kids sort of, I forget exactly what the whole impetus for it is, but basically there is all these sort of classic horror movie monsters come to town, and he's a very spooky Halloween writer, obviously, which is why I loved him. But the sort of person who wins, who's the most monstrous person in the town, is the person who's trying to ban the books in the town. And seeing both what my mother went through and also how he processed it, because I'm sure like ours was not the only school where people were objecting to him being in the library and stuff like that. Seeing that he was processing this and this was his stance on it, I've never forgotten that. It has shaped how I am in the world, how I write, how I approach the things that I believe in. Again, like I said, public school teachers are warriors, but I do work at a public library and could not be prouder to be a part of that. And even though I worry very, very much. But we all know what we're fighting for. It's extremely clear now more than any time in my life, I think. So, thank you.
This work? Do we have sound? Okay. So I was trying to think about this, and I don't know what I might contribute because I'm not really an expert in censorship either. But I was thinking about the way that censorship has at least entered my mind in the last 6 months or so, and some friends and I, because of the pandemic, decided to try to go through Ulysses together, and somehow we made it. But I have this old. So I volunteered when I think I was like 16. I volunteered at this little local used bookshop that just didn't have any money to pay anybody. But anyway, I volunteered to help the owner. I helped her stock books or whatever. And the way that she paid me was that, I got to take a book from time to time. And anyway, my really good friend had just been telling me about this book, Ulysses, and and we were going to try to read it. So she had a copy there, and so anyway, I took it. And I never read Ulysses for about a long time after that, but I did read the court decision that's on the front of the Modern Library decision, where they decided to, I can't remember exactly what was going on, but it was banned for a while, and then ultimately, I think his name is Woolsey, maybe, had a big court case and then allowed it to be published in the United States. And I was thinking about that, and I just recently transitioned from college education to high school teaching. And one of the things that they talked to me about as I was interviewing was, how are you going to deal with parents whenever they start coming at you about the things that you're teaching or the things that you're thinking about? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I never really had to deal with a parent before, but there they are, I'm sure. But, I was thinking about, what kind of stuff gets banned. And you hear about like little towns across the United States banning things like Harry Potter, and you just think, oh, well, yeah, Harry Potter, sure, that's dangerous. But it's happening, right? And so, I was just thinking about it, and there's really kind of a couple things going on. I mean, like if you look at something like Ulysses, which, at the time when it came out isn't even really a novel, at least not in a recognizable shape. It's this, so I forget it, the big hairy monster or whatever Henry James called Moby Dick. But anyway, it's this big floppy thing that comes flying at you, and you don't know what to do with it. And then Harry Potter is just something that a kid reads. And I was thinking about how, really what it is this attempt, censorship is this attempt to sort of impede growth. It's an effort to impede the way in which we push limits of society, the way that we find new ways to talk about, our evolving experiences as a culture. And it's about preventing children from expanding their minds and finding different ways to be who they want to be. And I think that, one of the things that I find really scary about it is not so much the banning of the books, right? Because James Joyce is fine. I mean, he's as dead today as he was yesterday and will be tomorrow. I mean, we're not going to hurt him, and J.K. Rowling is richer than any of us will ever be. So she's probably fine. And the books, nobody cares about those. And also whenever you think about the attempts to ban stuff, they're really inept, as you all have already said. Whenever they try to ban something, they haven't read it. They have no idea what the hell's going on in there. You look at something like Ulysses, there's no pornography in there. Are you kidding me? And then you look at something like Harry Potter, and it's like, this is the most conservative thing I've ever read. I mean, I like it. It's fun, and I enjoy it a great deal, but there's no radicality here. There's no challenge to the status quo, unless the status quo that you're trying to challenge is like, school. So you sort of have to ask yourself, well, what are they doing, or what is the goal? And I don't think that the goal maybe is the books themselves, but rather, it's an idea about orthodoxy, and it's a mean-spiritedness towards which, that which swerves or diverges or moves apart. I don't really have a problem with conservatism per se, but what this is a sort of idea of how do we destroy growth, and how do we destroy difference, and how do we destroy change, and how do we destroy the ability to speak to new experiences so that people can hear those new experiences and have new experiences themselves. And I was thinking about this with my students. Today we were reading this book called, and I'd never heard of it before, but it's called The Age of Miracles by Karen Thompson Walker, I believe. And anyway, all of which is fine. But like one of the things that comes up there is, what do you do in a field where nobody is showing courage? What do you do in a field where, everybody lies all the time? It's a book that's kind of appropriate to now. It's about catastrophe. And how adults fail to help children in catastrophe because they lie all the time to save their feelings, save the child's feeling, to save everybody's feelings, And I think that, when you think about book banning and you think about the particular cruelty of the United States right now, the question is how do we respond to it, right? And, for me, the easy answer is always, well, you're supposed to respond with kindness. But I mean, that's getting harder and harder to do. And yet, the imperative is growing stronger and stronger. So I'm not really sure, where this is supposed to go, but, just there's a striking sense that, whenever you're talking about banning books, the response is, to write more, to care more, to invest in each other more, to communicate more fervently, right? Because the books don't matter. It's us right here having the conversation around the books and what they say to us and how they might help us grow and how we might help each other grow through them, or even throw them away and, grow just talking to each other, about recipes or some stuff like that, So anyway, I'm not sure, but that's what I was thinking about whenever I was thinking about this.
You can hear me? Okay. Thank you, Jill. Memorial Library of Nazareth, and I'm just delighted to be here with everyone. I've known and admired Kate and Joyce for many years, and it's really nice to meet you, Alan and Colbert. Just a really brief memory from my childhood. I promise it's brief. There was a little library. It was in a house. It was about 2 miles from where I lived. And in my generation, how kids are just tossed outside, God knows how I survived. But anyway, I was little and I'd ride my bike into this library. And I remember I was young enough that they wouldn't let me go into the adult section. But I remember one kind librarian when I begged, let me in. And that moment has always been emblematic for me of libraries and librarians, of offering access, of widening possibilities. I wanted to say that it's kind of a little bit of a love song to libraries that I'm giving to you today. I think of libraries as real hubs of creativity, not only for the patrons, but I think of the librarians themselves as, these remarkably creative people. Writing is a choice, reading is a choice, selecting what we read is a choice. For librarians, they have to be so creative about what they present, what they choose, what they choose to validate. We often talk about how in the US, we can go to Amazon and get libraries in various places if we have enough money. But in libraries, we have the availability to get books even if we don't have the money. But I think where so often the trouble arises is in what's often called the disappearing of the book, because librarians who are making these creative choices have to face such pressures, so many pressures to take books from the shelves or not to order books. And because every library is creative in itself, responding to a community, responding to local culture, local histories, there is the sense of the community molding a perspective. And so librarians very often, it seems, have to push back in one way or another, in the way that Kate was mentioning. I loved Kate's story of her marvelous mother and her mother's integrity. But I think of the boldness and resistance to certain kinds of pressures that librarians have to be adept at dealing with, and not only protecting unpopular works, but protecting even popular works, as was mentioned earlier, as Joyce was mentioning, works that have stood time's test for their value. Also, I believe it was also mentioned, I think Joyce had mentioned as well, the real threat because of LGBT plus books now, that so often the push is there. An organization that I really like very much is PEN. The organization's poets, essayists, and novelists, and they work so hard to protect expression and protect writers. Most recently I was reading, they were working with the pressure in a California school to pull Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. They've been working, through various states. They also worked this year to ensure readers could read books by John Bolton and Mary Trump as well. So I think that organization is really useful. It occurred to me when I was looking at the list of the banned books, how many of those books are fiction? And I think that's really telling. There's something about fiction that, because it's putting in constellation many perspectives and points of view, sometimes there's an attempt to kind of collapse those perspectives and to make fiction thinner. I also believe that because fiction so often causes us to feel a kind of lived experience, it has a kind of spark or a charge that feels dangerous. So I think that's often, fiction's power, and it's often why so many of those challenges are about novels or children's books, for instance. Language is meant to get us into trouble continually. It can't avoid it. And I think what's been helpful to me is to think in praise of libraries and schools and how they have to work to make sure underrepresented voices are available. And I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'll tell you, I have been guilty of, in my life, but it's a singular parental choice. Do you remember, any of you remember the Olsen twins at all? Hey, I would not let my daughters watch those. There's no pornography, there's no nothing. But those little girls were so superior seeming to adults. I said, I'm not going to have this modeled in my house, okay? So in thinking about that, I think about libraries and how a parent could say, I don't want my child to read X. Well, that's that parent's right for that child. But, I think as Joyce and others have suggested, that's not that parent's right to say other children can't read this book. Books can be lifesavers. Books can make us less lonely. Books can bring to the forefront ideas that let us discover new ways to live in the world. I do have a book, speaking of books, to recommend, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. I guess, is it backwards, probably? No, is it not? It's all right? Okay, it's backwards to me. It's Dare to Speak. It's from the CEO of Penn by Suzanne Nozzle, and Defending Free Speech for All, and it deals with book burning, book bans, book disappearances, the books in schools, as Colbert was referring to, and also some international issues, as Alan was referring to as well, too. And some of the differences between the U.S. View of freedom of speech and some European views of freedom of speech. So I'll end simply with that recommendation, and thank you again.
Thank you, all of the panelists. Before we open it up to everybody, I just wanted to give all of you an opportunity to respond to anything that any of the other panelists has remarked on.
If not, Jill, can I just tell a little story, short story?
Absolutely, sure, go for it.
So a sort of different perspective. Years ago, decades ago, 1979, I, for some reason, was teaching in Eastern LA at a Bishop Connolly Memorial High School, which was 99% students of color, a girls' school, and a Catholic girls' school, and there I was, a suburban Jewish boy, and I was charged with having to fill in for a fellow who, as sadly as it turns out, was one of the first AIDS victims, and I had to teach among my courses contemporary Black drama. It's a very good anthology. You might be familiar with it. But it's got some very rough language in it. This was, the stuff was written in the 60s and 70s, very, very candid street talk. And I was getting my master's degree, I was very sure of what I was doing. After all, this was literature, and all of this rough language and experience I thought was great because it's literature, and the writing is about these experiences, not advocating this language, but this language was there. There I was, droning on in my usual way, and all of a sudden a young woman stood up and just stood up. And I asked her what the trouble was, and she, I won't quote her. Let's just say she gave me some of the language back, from some of the language of the plays. Essentially, she said, "Where the blank do you come off telling us about this language and these experiences? What do you think it's like for us to hear this stuff, especially coming from you, who obviously you haven't lived it?" That was a moment, I'm telling you. And of course, she was absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I'm not, of course, I'm not saying that material should not have been in the classroom. It should have been, but I should have been immensely more sensitive about presenting it. And I always tell, when I wasn't retired, I always tell American Lit students about this when we get to Huck Finn, because Huck Finn, as you all know, is one of the most famous masterworks that is challenged because of its use of the N-word and a few other things. And so I tell that story to future teachers, advising them, not to support censorship, but to be extremely careful about the way you address these issues, not just racial issues, but issues that cause pain to students. And if we just glide over that pain and say, well, of course we all agree, and of course we can all look at this language, and of course, then I think we're doing harm. And I'm not advocating censorship. I'm advocating sensitivity to this stuff, and listening to our students even before they speak. I'm done.
Any of the other panelists here to respond to anything any of them have shared?
I have a question. Just from those of you who work in a library, what are your experiences now? Are you finding that there's some pressure to remove some books from the shelves, or have you experienced that locally?
So there are several people who work in libraries in the audience. So if any of them wants to share.
I don't have like any kind of collection or shelf management experience, so I can't really speak to that at Babel.
I can speak as a library board member, which isn't the same, but I hear about things in the Bethlehem Public Library, and so I'm aware of efforts on the part of an individual to remove a book that celebrates and supports, I think, LGBTQ youth kind of finding and embracing that identity. I don't remember the title, and I think this is a person who sort of routinely challenges books that address content like that. And the library, I believe, has a pretty clear policy and a way of responding when things like this happen that's pretty effective. But that's a couple. I'm at least 2 steps removed from that, Lee, but I know it's happened fairly recently.
Hi, this is Shelby. I have kind of had an opposite experience. I work at the circ desk at the Nazareth Library, and I remember last year we had our banned books display, and the way that we had displayed it, we actually had caution tape over the books that had been banned at a previous time, and reasons for why they were banned. And we had a few patrons actually come to the circ desk and stand up for books. They were like, why in the world would you ban this? This is a phenomenal book. Yes, it talks about some very, difficult situations, but who are you to tell us what we cannot read? And, then we go on to explain, like, it's just a display. We are kind of letting you know the experience that other people have had with these books. And honestly, it was very refreshing to have people come up to you and say, even though I don't necessarily agree with what this book is about, why are you telling people that they can't read it? And, after we tell them that that's not the case, they're like, oh, beautiful display.
That's great. And Lee, I enjoyed your praise of libraries. I haven't gone to the local public library often enough. And last time I went, I was struck at just the peace of the place. Just it's like a sacred place. It's just a wonderfully civilized place. And I'm sure our library in Stroudsburg is not unique for that. And I cherish all kinds of things with my mom, but my mom, when my sister and I were kids, and we would come home with stacks of books like this, and we just could not write. Heaven forbid that disappearing.
So now if we could just open up to anyone. I know a number of people have placed some comments or some questions into the chat while everyone was speaking. So if you did put something into the chat and you'd like to share it aloud with everybody, that might be the best, so it is on the recording then officially. Or if you didn't put something in the chat and you would like to ask something or put something, feel free to go ahead and do that. We'll open it up to everyone.
I'm going to speak for the person who asked what everyone's favorite banned books are, because that's a great question. And I will start. Probably my favorite, sort of in the pantheon of classically banned books, is got to be The Diary of Anne Frank. I read that when I was in 8th grade, and it was really the first book I remember being given in school under the sort of, this book is frequently banned, and of course, like, there were some kids who were like, man, there's like sex things, but like, it just struck me, even at the age of like 13, what a powerful book that is, and to just deny people who were her age that window into that experience because, like, was also a teenager. Like, it just, it was really made it very clear to me kind of what that, and again, it's like, it's sexuality, right? Like, there's some stuff where she's like, there's some like possible homosexuality, but also like she's a teenage girl, like she's growing and developing and all of these things, and all the things that like are now in my lifetime, to see what young adult fiction is capable of in terms of like the breadth of topics that YA literature will go. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, that book really meant a lot to me when I read it, and I can't imagine not reading it at that age.
I was looking for a list. I haven't checked the list recently of the most frequently banned books. I saw The Handmaid's Tale. That's not surprising. Some are more surprising than others. I will say that Invisible Man, I had not read it until I taught it. And I think it's a remarkable book. It's so much more than I realized. Wasn't quite aware of what I was getting into.
I almost feel like it's like, I don't want to ban it from high schoolers, but I don't think I would have been emotionally prepared to understand that book until I was in college. I think I would have needed a little more world under my feet.
It is, it's hard to imagine reading that book going into 11th grade. That's right. That's a good point.
Yeah, for like summer reading, to just throw that at a kid who has had a very different experience from the experience in the book. Yeah.
But the opening of it is often excerpted. That's that chapter that's called the Battle Royal, right? And that's in anthologies and that probably a lot of high school students read, and that's very accessible, and a really, really valuable and important look at race in the U.S. And so I do think, but it goes into so many other things that are, and it's kind of a modernist book too, right? So it's not kind of, it's a modernist novel. And so it has structural complexities and linguistic complexities, et cetera, that would be tough for a teen reader. I agree. Yeah.
Even that first chapter is amazing, and some of it is extremely raw.
Yeah.
The material about the stripper and about how the young men are forced to look, which is a surprise to students. And so then you have to talk about, well, what is it about our culture that makes such young men, that makes us all look at that sexual icon? And then you have to talk about, well, why is it a blonde bombshell? And how many black women are sexual icons. And so the young men have to lust for something that they're somebody that becomes a something that they're not allowed to have. And so it conflicts those young men hopelessly, and this is an extremely sophisticated chapter. It's just amazing.
And you have the white men, the pillars of the community on the periphery in that scene, right? All drunk, all smoking cigars. It feels so weird. I don't know, timely to me. I was thinking about that recently and thinking I need to teach that again, just because that's the imagery of that chapter seems to me to speak somehow to the present moment.
You can read it as allegorical, and the surrounding power brokers are, of course, all toxic and white, and the young black men fight against each other, and the white community laughs, and that's a tough one to swallow. But boy, Ellison he told it the way he saw it.
I think for me, my favorite banned book would probably, well, two of them. One would be Huckleberry Finn, but with, the caveat of the kind of contextualization and sensitivity that you're all mentioning. The other would be Lolita. And I always think Lolita, it's a story of child abuse and child rape. And it's a horror story. For years, it's been projected as a kind of just a language game, but it actually is a nightmare. And I think that it's been banned, I think sometimes for all the wrong reasons, but you have to really go into that book and bring all your awareness of human suffering and vulnerability to it. And then it looks very, very different, I think.
Yeah, I had somebody, I was carrying that around one day, and I was pretty young, so I was like, oh, it's a book. Everybody likes books. Books are great, and the guy got mad at me just for walking by with it. He was like, that guy's a pedophile, and I was like, who? And he's like, Nabokov. Like, I don't think it's autobiographical. Anyway, we got into a little bit of a fight about it, but anyway, one of the ones that I always think about is 1984. Not so much. I think it gets banned a little bit, but the reason why is, Orwell was really instrumental for me for understanding language, for understanding how language is used actively rather than, negatively, but also positively in order to suppress thought and to suppress expression by mangling meaning and over expanding words and using cliche in order to sort of steal from us the specificity and sharpness of our thinking. And the idea that, I don't know, the idea that being sharper and being more intelligent and more thoughtful, is something that you would want to actively suppress always strikes me as kind of, I don't know, revealing maybe.
Other questions or comments?
Well, I'll just say this, that it's wonderful to meet you all. And I'm not sorry I'm retired, but I'm a little sorry I'm retired and not in a group like this anymore, except for special occasions like this. And I'm just very glad to have met you all and hope to see you again. I don't know if we're saying goodbye, but I wanted to get that in.
Gil, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay.
You
No,
guys hear her?
I had a few questions on the chat. I don't know if you wanted to read it or.
It's up to you. Do you want me to read them?
Yeah, sure.
All
No,
right. Let me.
no. I mean, I don't know how many because I have to go. So just I wanted to.
Okay, I'll just read them really quickly, and then Blandine, if
Sure.
you want to pick which ones you want to talk about. So she wrote, in France by law since 2001, a book will be banned based and only based on the fact that it can trigger civil chaos. No pressure groups, whatever. They could be are entitled to have a voice in that. The French woman has spoken. When you ban stuff, isn't it a condescending sign or way of you not trusting any potential audience's ability to think, process, and intellectually thrive? Yeah, great question. Great question.
That was about
As a
it, I
first
think.
person, choosing to ban a book also very much involves intercultural differences. Yeah, so Blandine, do you want to ask any of those or follow up with any other questions?
Well, no other questions, but I just wanted, I mean, just to make my point that from one country to another, it's so different. The fact that you ban a book is so, there's such a gap in between the kind of decision. And before I came over to the US, I was not aware of this week of, I mean, I was aware of the fact that banning book, it was so not important. It's not the right word. Sorry, excuse my French. I was so anyway, I became aware of that when I was in the library and looking at this. You know, you were talking about that, Jill. Looking at this display of books being banned, and I said, what is it about? I could not understand. And I understand why people will say, why are you like, these books are sensational, they're great. And I had never been aware of that. So that's why I was talking about intercultural differences, because in France, you never, apart from, you know, like in the 17th, 18th century, of course, books were banned because of sexuality and things. But at the moment, I mean, there's no pressure whatsoever from any groups, apart from, as I said in my comment, like provoking or you know, enticing like public chaos. No group whatsoever can ban or can have a say in banning a book. And I don't know if I'm clear what I'm saying, but it's just like mind-boggling sometimes what you're going through in this country. Sorry to say, but just there you go. That's me. So, but
Jill,
I
I was interested. Oh, sorry. I was interested, Jill. I didn't realize that the list of banned books started in my lifetime, essentially. Like that. Yeah, I mean, I am not a scholar of this sort of, because it's almost like it's a very American fad kind of thing to, like, once a book hits a certain level of popularity, right? It's the same way that like celebrities become super popular and then there's a backlash, right? There's something similar to the psychology of like a book reaches an audience where it could have true social impact, and then detractors can kind of come after it in certain ways.
Yeah, I'm also struck by that 1982. I wrote that down. I mean, it sometimes feels like you can trace everything back to Reagan. You know, I mean, but that was a period of this ramped up, frankly, the religious right. That's the rise of the religious right. That's where a lot of this is rooted in this country.
And that's why and that's why like intercultural differences is so important between, you know, countries, because like in France, we just different, there's a gap. I mean, there's no link between religion and state, and that makes a big difference already. And but that's so, I mean, this conversation, people, I'm going to have to go, it's so rich. So thank you. I really Really, bravo. That's super cool.
Your cat was very cute.
Yeah, I know, because she needs attention, so she's
Thank you for coming.
Okay, so I have to go. Thank you, Jill. I'll see you later. I'll see you soon.
Sure.
Amy, Patricia, see you soon. And yeah, that's it. Okay.
All right,
Bye.
take care.
Bye. Take care, you all.
So Mike put something in the chat that I just wanted to mention. He wrote, the best advertisement for a book is to ban it like any form of media. I find that when I mention that a book has been banned, some of my students are very surprised by that. And many of them are sort of intrigued. So, slapping that banned label on the book is sort of ironic, because in many ways, sometimes it draws more attention or draws more readers, than it would have initially. So thank you for articulating that, Mike. Any other thoughts? We have just a few more minutes before the meeting is officially ending. Does anyone else have anything that they wanted to share?
I guess I have one more thing to say, and that is I think that art that pleases everyone is not art. And literature has to be subversive. It has to be. Otherwise, it doesn't meet we all have our notions of literature. I suspect that our views in this room overlap quite a bit. But as far as I'm concerned, literature or any artwork has to be subversive. And that means it's expected that literature offends someone. And that's where the tension comes from. That's where the energy comes from. That's where the dialogue comes from. And Colbert's right in talking about that. That's where the intellectual energy and the sharpness comes from.
Anyone else? Last chance.
I have a quick question. It could open a whole can of worms, which is probably not what we want at the very end. But I'm a big fan of comic books and graphic novels. And I've always thought the content to come from these kind of books to be very progressive. Like, you kind of think of Captain America punching Hitler in the face before we were even in the war and that kind of stuff. So I guess I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on comic books and graphic novels as quote unquote like classic literature, because I know it's something that's always talked about, like what do people think about Watchmen, where does V for Vendetta stand? So just your quick thoughts on that.
I think you're right. I think that like science fiction, like a lot of sort of genre fiction, comic books kind of sneak in that subversive backdoor, right? Because people quote unquote don't take them seriously. So no one's paying attention to the fact that there's like super progressive, super anti-fascist stuff like happening in Watchmen. And now at this point, now they're called graphic novels, right? Then they sort of are getting the imperature of legitimacy, which they've always been legitimate. If art exists, it's legitimate. Very broad-minded in that term, and the way that I think about it. Or you can, high and low culture is sort of, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. But I think I've lost my train of thought, other than to say I agree with you. And I think a lot of subversive, really interesting stuff happens in those genres because people at first are not paying attention. The people who would be paying attention. But people also tried to like ban EC comics for like warping the minds of young children and like Tales from the Crypt and all that stuff, which I find delightful.
I agree with you, but there's one aspect of superhero. I grew up with that stuff and superhero movies and superhero graphic novels and so on, and that's the way it depicts bodies. It makes it seem as though if you're not muscled in the right way, and I'll leave it at that. If you're not muscled in the right way, then you can't be a superhero. And I think that sucks. And that really gets to me. Black Panther, for example, oh my God, it was like a bodybuilder's convention. And I just, I don't like that. I think that does real harm. I have a little background with eating disorders therapy, and I think it does real harm. But that's not to say that graphic novels can't be wonderful, and you know, I'm really just talking about a segment there.
Right. I totally do agree with that. Even just seeing the kind of crazy, like, dieting and, you know, exercising the actors have to do to even come close to looking a certain way, only to have, like, an additional bodysuit added onto them is just kind of bonkers. So I do think that's a great point. And obviously, as a woman reading comics, I can definitely relate to the idea of what a body should look like. So I think that's a great point to make.
I was just going to add, this just is, it seems weirdly timely. I'm not really, I have no expertise in the realm of graphic novels, and I also want to have a disclaimer to make, which is that I don't like Goodreads, but for some reason I woke up this morning and had a Goodreads alert. Carmen Machado just published a graphic novel, apparently, and I didn't even know she was doing that. And so I was intrigued, and I went to the Goodreads page about this book, and it's apparently a two teen girl queer focused horror. It's classic Carmen Machado. But what was striking about it was I started to just read through the comments, and the first one was glowing and over the moon, happy and positive. And then there were a series of really scathingly negative ones, all from male readers. Not to generalize, not to have any kind of, but it made me feel like this is what I associate with, you know, gaming culture too, right? This sort of, who are you to come in here and think you can do this? That was the tone of the comments. And I feel like, and I don't even know anything about it, but just having read 3 comments, you know, just accidentally almost and I felt like I could piece together the whole scenario there. And it's a form of censorship to do that, I think, right? To sort of say, you aren't welcome here. You can't be in this club.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
And not that they can't keep her out, you know, but it's not, I don't think it's going to create any problem for her. It was just really striking to me, though. I don't know. I thought, wow, this is what I hear about, and I'm seeing it. So.
Okay. Well, we're getting, like I said, really close to 8:30. So I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of the Nazareth Library to all of the presenters this evening. So Dr. Ben, Dr. Himmerfeld, Mr. Rakulia, Dr. Groot, and Dr. Upton. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise topic with us. And thank you to everybody who attended tonight. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you'll join the library again for other events that we have in the future. Now go read a banned book.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
So
Thank
much.
you.
A book about
It was a pleasure.
about the Beatles. Never mind. Okay. Thank you again. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too.